After a student accused Baylor University of not responding to her sexual harassment claims, the Baptist institution argued that it's exempt from any requirements under Title IX relating to sexual orientation or gender identity. The education department agreed. Biden administration has told Baylor University that it may be exempt from federal rules relating to the harassment of students based on their LGBTQ plus status, if it can show that doing so conflicts with its religious tenets. But the education department has not yet granted Baylor's request to dismiss complaints to the department from LGBTQ plus students that prompted the university to seek the exemption. This is how Title IX applies. It bans discrimination based on sex, requires colleges, universities to prevent and address sexual harassment. However, religious colleges and universities can seek an exemption if the requirements are consistent with the religious tenets of the organization that controls the institution. The reporting from Inside Higher Ed. The university argued in a letter to the department in May that civil rights complaints accusing Baylor of, among other things, not responding to sexual harassment claims from an LGBTQ plus student should be dismissed because the requirements conflict with the institution's religious tenets. Baylor officials told the department that it is exempt from any requirements under Title IX relating to sexual orientation or gender identity. So the background on the exemption efforts, Baylor sought that exemption after the Education Department's Office for Civil Rights started investigating complaints that accused the university of tolerating sexual harassment based on sexual orientation or gender identity, denying recognition of an LGBTQ plus student group, pressing university media to not report on LGBTQ plus events and protests in September and October 2021. The complaints were filed in 2021. University granted the student group a charter in 2022. Paul Southwick, director of the Religious Exemption Accountability Project, which also filed complaints with the department's Office for Civil Rights over Baylor's treatment of students, said student safety is at stake in this decision. Southwick said he's not sure how the exemption will affect the complaints, quoting, "This is uncharted territory when it comes to sexual harassment," he said. "What I can tell you is that the Department of Education has never denied a religious exemption, and when a school has asserted one historically for our complaints involving queer and trans students, they've always dismissed the investigation afterward." So there is that. It's like a rubber stamping, apparently, David.
This one is just, is mind-blowing on so many levels, because what it sounds like Baylor is saying is, okay, you are free if you're a student to harass somebody who's gay or lesbian or LGBTQ. But if you're a man and you harass a woman who identifies as a woman, who is you're harassing her because you like whatever, somehow I have a feeling Baylor will not allow that, or will they? I mean, suddenly can anybody harass anybody now at Baylor University? Because that is the only way that Baylor gets away with this. If you are gonna say, no, we're not gonna allow men to harass women or women to harass men, you better not allow men to harass other, men who may be gay or bisexual, whatever it is, because now all of a sudden there is the clear discrimination. So Baylor is not known for its academic rigor. It's clearly showing that its administration is totally out to lunch on this. They are going to lose in a big way eventually in the courts. And I think Baylor ought to just self-examine and say, we're just not going to allow harassment, period. Regardless of what you want to call yourself, you want to be LGBTQ, you want to be a furry, you want to identify as a cat or dog, whatever. Don't harass people, period.
Yeah, live up to your religious tenets. Why don't you try doing that, Baylor? And I know it was 20 years ago, but it still rings true up here. Because you have the same religious tenets when the one basketball player murdered the other basketball player and the coach lied about it. Was that the same institution? I believe it was, okay? I remember that story. And while we're not talking about murder, we are talking about people's respect for others, decency. What's wrong with just don't hurt people? Stop harassing people, like you said. I don't understand it, but I too hope that they lose. What about the Biden administration here and the rubber stamping? What about them and their responsibility to figure out something different?
That's a great point, because the Department of Education should not be rubber stamping. There should not be some sort of federal rubber stamp from the Biden administration or any other federal entity. The fact of the matter is this should be battled in the courts. And again, I mean, there's this administrative board that reveals whether or not somebody can have this sort of exemption. To me, that's ridiculous. Have a full-blown court hearing over this. take it away from the Biden administration. If you're going to just rubber stamp, let's let a court decide, because I think most Americans now would rather trust a courtroom to decide whether something is legal or not than trust an administration to determine whether somebody is tax exempt or religious exempt, for that matter.
Yeah, I think that one judge, nice looking lady with the curly hair, she's presiding over, well, the ex-president's case. I think she'd be a good judge for this one too. I just like her, and I think she's no nonsense. And you should have to put in a brief why you should be able to harass based on religious reasons.